"I'd like 3 copies of this, please," she said, handing over the USB. The man took it, just as a loud clap of thunder echoed overhead. Seconds later, large drops of rain began to fall, and before long, the rain was pouring down, soaking the entire city. Ashley looked at the clock on the wall as she waited anxiously for the print copies. It was 10 minutes to 9. As soon as they were ready, she headed for the door. As she pulled on the handle, her phone rang. It was Latham's assistant. "Ashley, Latham needs you to go make extra copies of the document right now," he said urgently. "What's wrong?" she asked. "We had an accident en route, and the documents got wet. You need to go print 3 copies, then come straight to the venue. Latham will meet you there." "Don't worry, I've already done it. I guess you might get stuck in traffic or something. This storm's terrible. I'm on my way." She had brought a waterproof bag with her, so she inserted the printed documents into the bag, sealed it up, and stepped out into the rain. She opened up her umbrella and hurried in the direction of the subway station. The wind howled around her legs, and the rain lashed at her face, but she pressed on as quickly as she could. The umbrella wasn't much use, and within just a few seconds, she was completely drenched. Under normal circumstances, it would have been much quicker to drive to the venue, but Ashley had decided it would be safer to take the subway. The streets and sidewalks quickly became gushing rivers, and on more than one occasion, she suffered a spray as cars drove too quickly through the running water, soaking her as she walked along. She shivered as the cold water seeped through her clothing and ran down the back of her neck, but she didn't slow down until she reached the station. She dripped incessantly as she waited for the train to arrive. It pulled into the station with a surge of cold air, making her shiver again. She counted down the stations, willing the train to go faster and for a few people to get on and off. At 9:15, the train eventually reached her stop, and she hurried off and out of the station. The wind and rain had gotten even stronger, and Ashley's umbrella soon blew inside out, snapping the prongs. She dropped it into the trash can and hurried on, still clutching her waterproof bag. Over the howling wind and lashing rain, she faintly heard her phone ringing. She fumbled into her pocket and almost dropped it in a puddle in her haste to keep moving. "Hey, Latham, I'll be right there," she said into the phone. "Wait for me at the entrance." Ashley couldn't hear what Latham was saying to her as she attempted to cross the road. She didn't hear the car coming toward her through the rain, and it tooted its horn loudly as it narrowly missed her. The driver cursed at her as he sped past, but she ignored him. She had arrived at the venue, and she pushed her way through the revolving doors into the lobby. Latham was there, waiting anxiously for her. He had also gotten wet and didn't look like his usual well-groomed self. There were only 5 minutes left, and he darted toward her as she stumbled through the door. He stopped in his tracks as he took in the state of her. She was drenched from head to toe and covered in mud and dirt. Her clothes clung to her tall, slender body, making her look emaciated. Her usually curly hair had lost its shape, and water dripped from it, forming a puddle in the lobby. Her makeup had smudged, and streaks of mascara ran down her cheeks. When she saw Latham, her eyes lit up. She wiped the water off her face with her sleeve and ran toward him. "Here are the documents." She thrust the waterproof bag into his hands. Her chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath. As she handed over the bag, their fingertips touched, and Latham shivered as the iciness of her hands rippled through him. He seemed to be hesitating, and Ashley pushed him gently away. "Go! You've only got 3 minutes left. Don't worry about me." He opened his mouth to say something, but he knew he had no time. He hugged the document to his chest and disappeared into the elevator. He reached the floor he needed at 9:29. "Oh, Latham, how good of you to join us," the receptionist said, looking at his watch. "We were beginning to think you weren't coming." Latham apologized for his lateness and placed 2 of the 3 printouts on the table. You don't really think I'd miss this opportunity, did you? He asked with a confident smile. My company has worked tirelessly for the chance to pitch this idea, but with this dreadful weather, we got caught up in a traffic accident. But we're here now, just in time. As he spoke, the image of Ashley in the lobby moments earlier surfaced in his mind. She had obviously rushed all the way there and had abandoned her usual pride in her appearance. She had been soaked to the core and covered in dirt, but she had barely noticed. The only thing on her mind had been him and his project, and he realized that she had gone over and above to deliver what he and the company needed at that moment. When Latham had first heard about Ashley, he hadn't been all that impressed with what he heard. But then he found out that she was Jonathan's biological half-sister. When he had met her for the first time, his earlier impression of her had begun to change. He had discovered that she was actually a decent young woman. Seeing her bedraggled state downstairs reinforced that view and confirmed in his mind that she was a far cry from what the rumor mongers had said about her. He remembered the icy touch of her fingers, and he hoped she hadn't caught a chill. He wanted to go check on her, but he had to complete the pitch. He tried to text Jonathan to ask him to come and take her home, but he couldn't get his phone to work. He went into the conference room and began his presentation. Downstairs, Ashley regained her composure and tried to tidy herself up a little. The rain began to ease off slightly, and she chose her moment to head back into the storm. She needed to go home, take a shower, and put some clean, dry clothes on. She stepped out onto the sidewalk just as a group of 5 youths was walking past, and she almost walked into them. One of them eyed her up and down. Hey, baby, what have we here? Looks like she's been living on the streets. Why don't you come home with me, and I'll show you where you can take a shower. His friends laughed, and they all formed a circle around Ashley, blocking her path. Her heart began to beat fast, and she sensed an immediate danger. She looked around earnestly for someone to help her, but the weather had forced everyone indoors, and there was nobody else around. The cars that drove past were oblivious to her and her fear. Ashley had learned some simple self-defense techniques, and she thought about using them, but she was only one person, and there were 5 of them. There was no way she could take them all on at once. The youths began to jostle her sideways until they had pinned her against a wall. She closed her eyes tightly as she felt their hands on her body. Ashley wasn't going to resign herself to her fate, and she decided she would have to fight. She raised her leg and kicked the youth closest to her in the crotch. The man yelped in pain, and one of his friends took the opportunity to trip Ashley up as she tried to get away. She landed on the wet sidewalk and heard the chilling crunch of breaking bones. She expected to feel a sudden surge of pain, but then she realized that it wasn't her bones that had broken. She looked to her side and saw one of the young men writhing on the ground in pain. You son of a bitch! You broke my leg! Just then, Ashley saw that the group had been joined by another person, and it took her a moment to realize it was her half-brother Jonathan. Raindrops dripped from his hair, and his shirt was half soaked. But his entire body seemed to be bathed in the raging flames of anger as he assaulted the youths who had been about to assault his sister. He held one boy in an arm lock and looked coldly around at his friends. Who else touched her? The boys took a collective step back in fear as Jonathan twisted the arm of the boy who had first threatened Ashley. He cried out in anticipation of the pain he would feel if Jonathan did to his arm what he had done to his friend's leg. He slid down the wall, and Jonathan dropped him to the ground. Ashley was horrified. She had never been involved in such a scene before, and for a moment, she was unable to speak. All of you get lost, Jonathan yelled threateningly. If I ever catch any of you mistreating a lady again, you'll have a lot more than a couple of broken bones to contend with. The youths' faces turned pale with fright. They helped their injured friends up, and they staggered away, whimpering as they went. Jonathan! Ashley looked at her brother with a surge of emotion. You... It's okay, he said reassuringly. Then, for the first time, he noticed the state she was in, and he frowned. "What the hell happened to you? Did those guys do this to you?" She shook her head. "No, I had to deliver a document to the Thom in the pouring rain. I was running out of time, so I had to do whatever I could to get it to him. That's how I ended up looking like this." "You must be frozen." He took the suit jacket that his assistant, Jack, held out to him, and he draped it over Ashley's shoulders. She immediately began to feel warmer. The enormity of what had just happened began to sink in, and she realized how grateful she was to Jonathan for turning up just in time. "Thank you." She pulled the jacket up to her neck and hugged herself. Jonathan didn't say anything. Instead, he took the umbrella that Jack handed him and opened it up above Ashley's head. "Get in the car," he said kindly. She followed him and Jack to the car that was parked across the street. He opened the door for her and she climbed in. Jack got in beside her and Jonathan took the front passenger seat. "Take my sister home, please, James," he said to the driver. James started the engine and turned up the heat. The car soon warmed up and Ashley began to feel better. Later that afternoon, when Ashley had taken a long, hot shower and had gotten dressed into fresh, clean clothes, she mused over what had happened that morning. She began to resent Latham for having put her in such a situation. If it hadn't been for him and his project, she wouldn't have gotten into such a bedraggled mess, and the group of youths wouldn't have tried to take advantage of her. He hadn't even bothered to call her soon after the meeting had ended. As she ate her lunch, her phone rang. It was Latham. She let it ring a few times before answering. "Hello," she said, trying pleasure in her voice. But Latham didn't notice.
"Hey, Ashley, we got the deal. Are you all right now? Did you get home okay?"
He went on to explain that the meeting had gone on until midday. The client had accepted his pitch on the spot and wanted to finalize the details there and then. His phone had gotten waterlogged during the storm, and he had been unable to call anyone. He had taken a taxi home, where he had attempted to dry out his phone using a hairdryer. That was when he had called her. His explanation, although the fact that he had secured the deal, softened the hardness of Ashley's heart. "That's fantastic," she said enthusiastically. "All the effort last night wasn't in vain, and I'm fine now, thank you. I'm going to take everyone out tonight to celebrate. I'll come pick you up at 6 o'clock. "Great. See you then." For the next few weeks, everyone in Latham's company was busier than ever. They had won the contract, which meant their workload had increased significantly, and with it came increased market shares and higher end-of-the-year bonuses. And because Ashley was the one who had helped to secure the win, her popularity among her colleagues soared. A couple of weeks after they had won the account, Latham, Ashley, and two of their colleagues took a business trip to Miami to visit a client. The client had booked their hotel, and Latham was delighted to be given the presidential suite. Ashley and her colleagues were given executive suites, which were almost as lavish. The hotel was just a 5-minute walk to the beautiful white sands of the beach. Ashley had never been to Miami before, and she found the place exhilarating. The evening after they arrived, the client organized a dinner for everyone involved in the project. The CEO was a man in his early 30s, and he immediately hit it off with Latham. The atmosphere was relaxed, and everyone let their hair down. A fair amount of alcohol was consumed throughout the evening, and Ashley found herself feeling a little dizzy, largely because one of the client's salespeople kept topping off her glass and encouraging her to drink. She sat back in her chair and tried to regain her composure. She focused her gaze on the dance floor where Latham and some of the others were dancing. Latham was flanked by two beautiful women, and Ashley felt a surge of jealousy. She had seen him with women before, and it had never bothered her, so she was surprised to feel such an ugly emotion. She blamed the drink. She tried to push the feeling away, but it only made it worse. Finally, she couldn't hold it in anymore and was about to get up and confront him when he said goodbye to the two women and walked toward the bar. He ordered a glass of iced water and was about to walk away with it when he locked eyes with the bartender who had served him. The woman was the exact image of his late wife, Olivia, and his heart leapt into his mouth. At first, he wondered if it was her twin sister, Esther, but then he noticed a mole on the side of her face, which he didn't remember ever seeing on Esther. He stared at the girl, unable to take his eyes off her. The bartender obviously began to feel uncomfortable under his gaze, and she stared back at him. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" she asked with a hint of irritation. Latham came back to his senses. No, thank you." He returned to his seat next to Ashley and tried not to think about his encounter with Olivia's doppelganger. But he couldn't get it out of his mind, and it made him feel dizzy. "I didn't think I drank that much," Latham thought. "Maybe I'm not feeling well because I haven't slept well for the past couple of nights." He stood up and went to the CEO of the company they were trying to sign a contract with. "I drank a little too much," he said. "Please excuse me. I'll go to my room and sleep for a while. See you tomorrow." As everyone said goodbye to him, Ashley also stood up and rubbed her furrowed brow. "I'm also a little dizzy. Sorry, everyone." She then moved quickly and caught up to Latham. They had been having dinner at the hotel they were staying at, and they both had rooms upstairs, so she pressed the button for her floor and he pressed his. In the elevator, the light played over both of their faces and highlighted the contours of each. Suddenly, Latham swayed, and he instinctively reached out for the elevator wall. Ashley was startled and quickly supported him. "Are you feeling unwell?" His hand grasped hers, and the heat from his palm shocked her. He didn't answer and just let himself rest against her. By that stage, they had reached Ashley's floor. The elevator door opened, but she ignored it. Instead, she and Latham went up again, and she helped him up until they reached the door of his room. He was silent all the way, but the temperature of his skin on hers told her all she needed to know. She wasn't sure how drunk he was. He didn't react at all until she fished out the keycard from his pocket and entered the room with him. "Latham, do you need to throw up?" she asked hesitantly. She wasn't sure whether to help him to the bathroom or the bedroom. His only answer was to push her against the wall. She then realized that he was looking at her intently. She was startled and instinctively wanted to escape. However, he suddenly grabbed her chin to tip her head back, and her heart leapt into her throat. She then saw him look at the corner of her eyes. He raised his hand and gently stroked one of them. "Why not?" he whispered. She didn't know what he meant, but her intuition told her that he was a danger to her at that point. She knew that if she didn't leave soon, she might do something she would regret. She lifted her own hand and tried to push him away. At the same time, he moved his hand to the wall beside her. "Ashley?" He was somewhat absent-minded. As soon as he spoke, she stopped trying to push him away. He stared at her and sighed softly. "I heard that you got into a dangerous situation after bringing me those documents for the pitch." Ashley's eyes suddenly widened. She hadn't thought that he would ever bring that up. She didn't even know that he knew what had happened. The day in question, he had invited everyone to dinner after closing the deal, and he had asked her about the rain and how she had gotten back. She had casually replied that she had met Jonathan when she left and that she had been fine. He hadn't said anything, so she hadn't known that it still played on his mind. He must have heard from Jonathan that she had been surrounded by a group of youths who had almost taken advantage of her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You almost got into trouble because you helped me. It was lucky that Jonathan was there." She pursed her lips as she looked at the man in front of her. She suddenly felt an unidentified emotion surge through her chest. and she could only recognize it as bitter and building in strength. The two of them didn't move until Latham closed his eyes and shook his head. He swayed dizzily, and his face was reddening. When he opened his eyes again, his presence felt ominous to Ashley. He was giving her a look of desire, and until that moment, he had never looked at her like that before. She tried to sound him out about it, but she only got as far as his name. He lowered his head down bit by bit toward her until she could feel his breath tickling her cheek. She felt her hand curling up in a fist, and she tried to instigate a proper conversation. "I'm Ashley. I think you might have made a mistake again. Perhaps you should let me go?" But he raised his hand to cup her face. "I know." His voice was low, and the words smashed into her heart as she looked at him in astonishment. "He knows," she repeated to herself. She could feel her back sticking tightly to the wall, but she couldn't tell what was happening in her heart. There was nervousness and fear, but also a little bit of joy, although she didn't dare to say that aloud. "I'm Ashley," she said again. "Are you—" However, she didn't get to finish because her words were sealed off with a kiss. Ashley kept her eyes wide open, and she got an extreme close-up of Latham while he pressed his lips against hers. The feel of his lips took her back to the previous time in the forest. They were soft, and she breathed in his unfamiliar, yet also somewhat familiar scent. Because they were so close, she could clearly see each and every one of his eyelashes. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Ashley was immediately pulled back to the real world and started to struggle. But Latham didn't give her any chance at all to get away, and he swallowed all the words that she wanted to say. She had no room to escape and could only hear tireless knocking on the door. A female voice followed the sound. "Housekeeping, do you need me to clean your room?" Latham hadn't heard the voice at all. He was only aware of the exceptionally loud banging on the door, so he wrapped his arms around Ashley and guided her further into the room. Ashley had originally felt a little dizzy too, but at that moment, she was confused by his kiss, and it only made her head spin more. She stumbled with him and was unsure what was happening. The dizziness overwhelmed her, and she fell onto the soft bedding, only to lose her breath again. She wanted to resist, but she found that she didn't have the strength. All of her determination had left her when he said that he knew it was her. The knocking on the door had only stopped after the person heard the noise in the room. Latham lay on top of Ashley, and when the pain and pleasure came, she opened her eyes and looked at the man with her. She was hesitant, but somewhat expectant. "How will things be between us tomorrow?" she wondered. She felt that her entire body had been used, and she wondered if other men were also like him in bed. After it was over, Latham fell into a deep sleep, and he hugged her tightly as though she were a pillow. She was tired, but her heart wouldn't calm down, and her thoughts were running wild. Worry, happiness, and nervousness kept washing over her. The sleeping man suddenly murmured, "Water." Ashley knew that it was important to drink water after alcohol, so she gently lifted his arm off her to grab him a drink. She wanted to help him up, but he was too heavy. There was no straw in the room, but he kept muttering about wanting to drink water. After a moment's thought, she drank a mouthful and leaned over to Latham. Her heart was beating so fast, and she was breathing so unsteadily that she almost choked on the water until her lips touched his. As soon as they did, her whole body seemed to be filled with joy. She was tempted to do more, and wondered why she felt so happy. Ashley fed Latham little by little until she had finished the glass of water. He sighed in satisfaction. She was about to get up to put it away when she heard him muttering again. She couldn't hear clearly, so she bent over and pressed her ear against his lips. When his breath landed on her ear, it sent a wave of electricity through her. While she was still reeling from that, she heard him say, "Olivia." She felt as if a cup of ice water had been poured over her, and her face turned pale. She froze where she was until she heard him speak again. "Little one." After he had spoken, he stretched out his arm to pull her into his embrace. Ashley, however, jumped as if she had been electrocuted and dodged his touch. She fell to the ground. The carpet was soft and warm, but her entire body felt cold. "He thinks I'm his late wife," she thought. It made her sad to realize that he had probably regarded her that way while he had made love to her. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she tried her best not to cry. She raised her head proudly and forced the feeling back. She looked again at the man on the bed. His harder outer shell had faded away with sleep, and he looked peaceful. She found it amazing that someone so calm could be so hurtful. She got up and picked up the clothes that had been scattered on the ground, piece by piece. She put them on with trembling hands, tidied her hair, and took a deep breath before leaving. He had told her just the other day that he didn't want her to fall for him. He had made it clear that he didn't have feelings for her. He had clearly only touched her the way he had because he was drunk. She guessed that he wouldn't even remember in the morning. She took another deep breath, and her sadness lessened a little. She refused to regret it because she did like him, and she had been aware of the possibility of mistaken identity. It was something that she hadn't dared to think about, but she realized that she had known subconsciously and had been somewhat mentally prepared. She gave Latham one last look and opened the door. Because she left in a hurry, she didn't notice that she hadn't quite closed the door when she pulled it. As she made her way to the staircase, a woman with a mole at the corner of her eye emerged. She had been hiding in the dim light of the corridor. The woman quickly glanced Ashley's way to make sure she had gone, and then made her way to Latham's door. She took out a small piece of metal that was stuck in the doorframe and then nipped into the room. Inside, Latham was still sleeping. Her gaze swept over him, and she took off all of her clothes. She then moved to the bedside and lifted the thin quilt. As she did so, she noticed a very obvious bright red stain on the sheets. The woman curled her lips into a snarl and lay beside Latham. Ashley returned to her room and went straight to the bathroom. She looked at her molted body in the mirror as her fingers clenched and then loosened. After a while, she wiped the tears that had finally fallen and took a shower. Her body was tired, but she didn't feel sleepy at all. She picked up the phone and, out of habit, opened the Bright Star game again. Unexpectedly, Galaxy was there too. When he saw that she was online, he didn't try and chat. Instead, he just pulled her right into the war zone. But her capabilities seemed to have deserted her. She ran in all the wrong directions, and she stood stupidly when she should have dodged or gone to pick up equipment. No one held back, and even though Galaxy was there to help, she still died early. A few words then popped up on the screen. "Not in a good mood?" "That's right," she replied. "Then watch me play," Galaxy wrote back. She switched to his perspective and watched as he knocked down the person who had killed her earlier. Instead of using a gun, he found a car from somewhere and rammed it into the person on the ground, which ended the session. As he picked up the spare equipment, he asked, "Are you happier now?" Ashley tried to smile as she typed her reply, but it was a very wobbly effort. "Yes." Finally, she fell asleep with the game still going, and her phone fell off to the side. The battery was flat, and it soon died. At that moment, Galaxy sent another message. "Next time you're unhappy, remember I'm here to help." When there was no reply, he guessed that she had fallen asleep. "Good night, Ashley." The morning sunlight peeked through the window and fell upon the two people on the bed. Latham moved and instantly knew that something was wrong. His head felt heavy, and his whole body was exhausted. He opened his eyes and turned his head, only to find there was a woman in his arms. He was shocked, and he stopped moving abruptly. However, his mind worked quickly as a number of scenes played through his mind. He had clearly entangled himself with a woman, and he recalled that it had lasted a long time. Swallowing hard, he looked more closely at the woman in his arms. She was not even an inch away, and he could clearly see a tiny mole at the corner of her eye on the exposed half of her face. An image suddenly appeared in his mind of the bartender he had seen after coming off the dance floor the night before. He had frowned as a wave of doubt rose up inside him. In his memory, it was Ashley who had helped him up to his room. He couldn't understand how it was the bartender, with whom he wasn't even acquainted, next to him. Similarly, he recalled Ashley as being the one that he had had in his bed. He hadn't planned to do anything, but for some reason, the desire in his body had taken over, and he lost control. He had asked her to do things that they couldn't come back from. He decided that his mind was playing tricks because it appeared that it hadn't been Ashley at all, but the woman in front of him. He moved a little, and the woman in his arms murmured and opened her eyes. When she saw him, she looked just as shocked as he had, and tears immediately welled up in her eyes. Her voice was very soft when she spoke, and her head was angled toward him. She looked exactly like Olivia had. Latham's heart suddenly lurched again. The covers moved a little with their bodies, and he saw marks on her neck and collarbone. A chill ran through his entire body. He looked at her and tried to ask the question that had instantly sprung to his mind. "Last night, you and I?" His mouth was very dry, so he tried again. "Did I?" She lowered her head and held onto the bedsheet tightly while she shed continuous tears. Latham couldn't express the annoyance he felt. He sat up and went to put on his clothes. At the same time, he looked down and saw the bright red mark on the sheet. The image felt burned into his retinas, and his pupils constricted. "Was that your first time?" he asked. The woman continued to cry. Her thin shoulders trembled lightly, and she looked helpless and pitiful. "Sir, you were drunk yesterday. When I came to clean the room, you just..." She couldn't say the rest of the words, but her ears had turned pink. Latham's throat was so dry he couldn't speak. He nodded and headed for the bathroom. As the water cascaded over him, he felt nothing but self-blame. The blood on the sheet had really pricked at his conscience. She had clearly been a virgin, and he didn't think he could let it go just like that. Should I give her money? He wondered. He decided that was a good idea, and that she would perhaps be grateful for the money if she was only working as a bartender and housekeeper. He finished washing, dried his body, and put on his bathrobe. As he was drying his hair, he heard the faint sound of a door opening. "She's leaving," he thought. He quickly ran after her and caught up with her at the door. He grabbed her wrist. "Wait a minute." He paused and made sure he was calm before he continued. "What kind of compensation do you want?" She seemed afraid of his touch. She pulled herself back and looked at the floor. "I don't know. I don't want anything." "I'll give you money. How much do you want?" The woman visibly trembled, and she looked up with red, tear-filled eyes. Her face was puffy because of all the crying she had done, but her eyes were bright. "What do you think I am? My family may be poor, but I'm not selling myself. Why are rich people like this? Do you think you can bully and humiliate me?" Latham was stunned by her reaction. He looked at her chest, which was rising and falling quickly due to her anger. He suddenly thought of Olivia again, because, in the past, when she thought she had been wronged, she reacted similarly. When he thought of Olivia, another face appeared in his mind. He remembered the day that Ashley had been soaking wet and covered in mud. She had just smiled and passed the documents to him. He had been a little worried, but her eyes had been shining. She had said that the pitch was more important and not to worry about her. The woman in front of him seemed to have a similar stoicism to her. His lips seemed to move of their own accord as he said, "Then I'll be responsible for you." When his father's health had been deteriorating, his mother had suggested that Latham might like to find someone to settle down with again since Olivia had been gone for so long. The woman clearly hadn't expected him to say that. She had been caught off guard and stuck close to the door as if she was afraid of him. "How are you going to do that?" Although he didn't particularly want to, he said, "If you're single, you can consider yourself now with me." The woman pressed her lips together, showing her nervousness, and she hung her head. "I don't know." "You should think about it." He took out a business card and handed it to her. "This is my number. You can call me at any time." She took it and wanted to speak, but she stopped herself. Instead, she opened the door and ran away. Latham watched her disappear and close the door. He leaned against it as the disappointment and sadness he suddenly felt swallowed him little by little. He knew there was still a contract to sign that day, and that not everyone would have had a chance to organize their... Ashley slept late. The alarm sounded 3 times before it woke her up. She lifted her eyelids with great difficulty and went to the bathroom. She used the cold water to calm her slightly swollen eyes. Then, she put on the bare minimum of makeup before leaving the room. Several of her colleagues had already arrived at the restaurant on the first floor. Only Latham wasn't there. Ashley pretended as if nothing had happened and sat down to eat her breakfast. However, it wasn't long before she saw him. He seemed to be in a bad mood as well. He didn't even raise his head in greeting when he saw her. Ashley's heart, which had already sunk very low, cracked again because of that small detail. He appeared to have completely forgotten about their night together. Or is he choosing to pretend that nothing happened? She thought. Is he choosing to go back to square one? His attitude explained everything. He had obviously never liked her, and he clearly saw the previous night as a drunken mistake. She kept her head down and ate her breakfast quietly. It tasted like wax. Beside her, her colleague was a little excited and kept talking about something. Although Latham was the boss, he usually didn't put on airs, and everyone generally acted pretty casually around him. It didn't go unnoticed that Latham and Ashley were quiet when everyone else was chatting and laughing. The others were puzzled. "Did something happen?" one of them asked. Latham looked at Ashley for the first time. "It's nothing," he said. Ashley's hand tightened around her fork, but she refused to show her feelings. From that point, she made sure she participated in the discussions with her colleagues. She smiled broadly to look like she was interested. When Latham heard her laugh for no apparent reason, the knot in his heart pulled tighter. He figured that it really hadn't been Ashley that he was remembering from the night before. He picked up his coffee and used it to cover the other bitter taste in his mouth. The next 2 days were busy with tours and meetings. It was only on the last day that Latham and his team finally had some free time. Latham had never received a call from the woman he had woken up with, and he hadn't been alone with Ashley during those days. She had always seemed to be having fun with her colleagues or playing games on her phone. He went over to see what game she was playing, but there was a name on the screen above a chat. Galaxy had sent her a message. "Go to the beach, but don't swim. The weather isn't hot enough at the moment, so you'll freeze." Latham frowned slightly. "Your friend?" he asked. Ashley didn't even raise her head. "An internet friend. We're just playing games together." Latham wasn't going to say anything, but when he saw that she was smiling and talking happily to the other party again, he couldn't help himself. "It's someone you've never met before, so don't be fooled." At that point, she looked up. There was a thorniness to her expression. Who said that people online are all liars? There are many sincere people too. Ashley had never spoken to him like that before, and he wasn't used to it. His immediate thought was that she must be really interested in that person, and perhaps even in an online relationship. He knew that she wouldn't hear anything bad about them. At that moment, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before he answered. Hello.
Hello, I am...
Latham immediately recognized the voice as the woman from that crazy night. He hadn't even asked for her name and interrupted her as she was about to say it. Yeah, I know, he said quickly. Where are you? Ashley overheard his side of the conversation and laughed. She smiled self-deprecatingly and continued her internet chat as she walked. Jonathan chose that moment to call her. When are you coming back from your business trip? Shall we organize a meal together?
I'm heading back tomorrow,
Ashley said. Okay. It'll have to be the weekend. Nancy and I are planning to go to Santa Fe. Let's meet up before we leave.
Why don't we just go there together? I could do with a little break for a few days. And it's a beautiful place.
Oh, you've been there before? He asked. She hesitated.
Yes, I went with Brock. I'm sorry, but I found the delivery box from Hannah in your trash.
Jonathan felt a little helpless. All right, let's go together. He had noticed how Hannah had seemed to be doing better, but he also knew that she had to face her problems, so he felt there was no harm in Ashley going with them. Jacob was going to go to Santa Fe because he had to investigate the area for his assignment. Nancy was going to see him on the weekend, so she was very busy preparing for the trip and making sure everything at work was in place before she left. She was particularly busy with the game that was still under development. Not only did she have to manage Brightstar, but she also had to participate in the research and development of the new generation of unmanned cars for the Davis Group. They weren't being limited to the traditional mode of Valkyrie. Instead, some new concepts were going to be integrated. The cars weren't just cars and SUVs. They were works of art. Due to the rising in house prices, many people have started to focus on the mobile home market. The Sumoku Corporation, which was controlled by the Davidson family, was now selling recreational vehicles in America. However, their RV was still quite traditional, and they had just made the interior cozier and more comfortable. The Davis Group wanted to research and develop a really smart version that didn't need a driver to worry about the road conditions. The family living in the RV could even drink wine and enjoy delicious food while looking at the scenery outside the window. They could also take an afternoon nap and wake up to find they had already arrived at their destination. They were looking at launching a mobile smart suite. Nancy and her team had been immersed in research and development. Finally, the blueprint was designed, and the specific parameters were calculated and tested. As simple as it sounded, it had been a very long process. Nancy drank the bitter medicine that was supposed to help with her anemia. I can't believe I have to finish this course of medicine before Jonathan and I can try to have a baby. Her heart pounded as she thought of having a child. She was looking forward to it. She thought back to her appointment with Helga. Is it true that twins can run in the family? She asked. If you want twins, I can help you with that, Helga answered. Really? How? I can make a special medication that will make you more fertile, and you'll release more than one egg during ovulation. It's not harmful, and it won't affect your menstrual cycle. And what are the chances of me having a boy and a girl? The corner of Helga's mouth lifted into a slight smile, and two small dimples became visible on her cheeks. Her whole face lit up, and she looked lively, but her voice remained composed. That's up to fate. We have no control over that. Nancy smiled and nodded. All right. Regardless of whether she had sons or daughters, she would just be happy to have twins. She and Esther had envied those who had had twins or siblings. Esther later found out that she had a twin, but Olivia had passed away before she had had the chance to meet. Nancy knew she didn't have the genes for twins, but Helga was saying she could help her. She wasn't going to pass up the opportunity. If she had 2 sons, they would follow in Jonathan's footsteps, but if she had 2 daughters, she could share clothes with them when they grew up. Helga noticed her happy expression. I want to ask you a question. Why do you want to have a child? Nancy was stumped by the query and looked at Helga blankly. Helga was looking back at her with keen interest. Nancy answered seriously. Because I love Jonathan. I want to have a baby with him, no matter if it turns out like him or like me. Helga was a little confused by that response, but she quickly replaced the confusion with her usual indifference. Yes, I understand. Nancy didn't know if she understood everything herself, but she was certain of one thing. She didn't think that Helga had a lot of emotional experience, and she wasn't sure that she ever would. After she bid farewell to Helga, she saw Jonathan and Steve chatting about something. She went over and overheard the last part. Mom's condition has improved a lot in the past few days, Steve was saying. Whatever she gave her has been remarkably effective. After he finished speaking, he looked contemplatively at Nancy. If you're here, does that mean you guys are getting a bit of help to have children? Jonathan ignored his question and went back to something they had been discussing earlier. Steve, we know what to do. Steve was obviously unhappy with Jonathan's perfunctory attitude. He looked at Nancy again and then turned and walked toward Helga. Jonathan, what's wrong? Nancy asked. Steve thinks there's something suspicious about Helga's identity, he said somewhat helplessly. They didn't know what Steve said to Helga, but she didn't even look at him and completely ignored his words. Nancy laughed. Steve's quite sweet, isn't he? Jonathan narrowed his eyes. Sweet? Are you getting itchy feet? Nancy hid a smile from him. Don't you think he is? He couldn't get the better of you, so he rushed over to confront her. I think that's cute. Cute? Jonathan repeated as he grabbed Nancy's wrist and pulled her back. She fell straight into his arms. His voice sank a little lower. Say a few more nice words and continue to praise him. Nancy could tell that Jonathan was jealous. She fell silent and tried to shake his arm off, but he looked away coldly. She blinked and stopped her praise of Steve out of a strong desire to survive. But I don't like those attributes. I like people who are cool, handsome, well-developed, and in possession of a good brain. She paused. If one of his attributes is low-level cuteness, then you're high-level. Nancy's eyes were bright as she looked at Jonathan and continued. He's at the bottom of the pyramid, and you're at the tip. He can't catch up with you no matter what. Only then did Jonathan look at her. He brushed away the stray hair from Nancy's face. You changed your tune quickly. Her face was oozing sincerity, and she looked a bit like a dog trying to please its owner. I'm telling the truth. I'm not trying to please you. Jonathan felt the warmth of love in his heart. He leaned close to her ear. Yes, I know. After leaving home, Jonathan received a call. Matthew's voice came through the receiver.
It's me. Come over tomorrow. I have something important for you.
Jonathan instantly understood. Okay, he replied. Although he didn't really care about gaining anything from the Davidson family, there were some things that he didn't want others to get, because they could be used as weapons against him. Seeing his serious expression, Nancy asked, What's wrong? Matthew wants me to visit tomorrow. I don't know if I can go with you to Santa Fe for the weekend. It's fine, she smiled. You be careful when you go. Jonathan nodded. Yes, I will. The next day, He went with Norman and 4 bodyguards to Cuba. Havana was still as prosperous as when he had left. He sat in the car that Matthew had sent to pick him up. It turned onto the mountain road and went straight to the top, where the Davidson family was located. As soon as Jonathan arrived, their butler Walter greeted him. "Welcome. Mr. Davidson is waiting for you in the main hall." It was clear to Jonathan that Walter was looking at him differently than the last time they had met. In the main hall, Jonathan found his oldest cousin Frederick, and the next in line, Theo. His third cousin Alexander was missing. He greeted everyone and took a seat. Matthew smiled as he spoke. "Jonathan, you did well a few days ago. Your cousin and I admire how you handled everything that was thrown at you. I called you here today because there are a few businesses overseas that I can't take care of. I want to officially hand them over to you." "Thank you," Jonathan replied calmly as he swept his gaze around the room. Theo squeezed the teacup a little harder with his fingers at the lack of reaction. "Walter, give the documents to Jonathan to take a look," Matthew said. The butler disappeared to Matthew's study and brought back a stack of documents. Jonathan took them, and the more he read, the more shocked he became. He wasn't sure that they belonged to Matthew at all, but they were certainly worth a lot of money. He wasn't surprised that his cousins were fighting about them. Jonathan repacked the documents. "Shall we meet with the lawyer tomorrow?" "Okay," Matthew smiled. "I like people as straightforward as you. Since you want them, there's no need to pretend to be virtuous." As soon as he finished speaking, his gaze drifted toward Theo. Theo's expression instantly turned icy. In order to hide his jealousy, he picked up his cup and took a large sip of coffee. "Jonathan, I'm sure you're tired after traveling here today," Matthew continued. "There are still some company matters that I want you to have a look at tomorrow, but you can rest first. You're staying in the same room as last time." Jonathan nodded. "Okay, thank you. By the way, it's Arthur's memorial tomorrow," Matthew said. "Our family was invited, and you can go too. There are no eternal enemies in this world." "All right, I understand," Jonathan said. He immediately realized why Matthew had wanted him there that day. It wasn't because he wanted to make business deals with him, but because he needed him to attend Arthur's funeral. Arthur had died at his hands. There were some things that the Davidson family still needed to make amends for to the Williams family. And he knew that it was bound to happen at the funeral. The major Cuban families were probably anticipating quite the show, and Matthew clearly intended to hang him out to dry. "I'll come back tomorrow," Jonathan said, "but you have to promise me one thing." When Matthew heard that, he exhaled loudly, but he didn't ask for further explanation. Instead, he just said, "Okay." Jonathan left the main house to find where he was staying with Norman and the others in his entourage. He passed Alexander in the corridor. Alexander was wearing a casual shirt and pants, and there was a woman beside him. When he saw Jonathan, he sneered. "I was wondering who was here, but it's no one important." Jonathan glanced at him indifferently and spoke just loud enough for Alexander and his companion to hear. "I would advise you to use a method that requires intelligence the next time you attack." Alexander hadn't expected to be mocked, and a malicious gleam came into his eyes. "Do you really think my father thinks highly of you? Your surname is Davis, and ours is Davidson." Jonathan's lips curved up into a smile. "Is that so? If that's the case, why did you go on the attack? Or are you threatened by my family?" Alexander's expression darkened, but it quickly returned to normal. "I hope you can still laugh tomorrow." Jonathan ignored him and left. He went to his room and checked for cameras as usual. After making sure there were none, he went to the bathroom. Later that night, He had finished processing his emails and was about to turn off the computer when there was a knock on his door. "Who is it?" he asked. "I've got you some supper," a woman's voice replied. Jonathan opened the door, took the tray, and put it aside. "Thank you." He was about to close the door when the woman suddenly cried out as if she tripped over something. She fell straight in his direction. The light in the room fell on her body, and he realized that she was only wearing a thin layer of gauze that didn't cover much. Her breathing was shaky, and she was trembling slightly. As soon as she came close, Jonathan moved quickly to the side. The woman had nothing to grab onto, and she fell to the ground in a sorry state. She looked up at Jonathan with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry. Can you help me?" Under the light, Jonathan saw how beautiful she was. She had no makeup on, and her skin was flawless. It was smooth and delicate, and he found himself staring. Jonathan raised his eyebrows and approached her playfully. "I'll help you up, but what will I gain from it?" The woman seemed momentarily stunned, and then her face turned red. "You don't lack anything. I don't know what I can give you." His eyes darkened, and his voice was slow and magnetic as he inched closer to her. "I am a man, and you are a woman. What can you give me?" She saw the expression in his eyes, and her heart started beating wildly. She suddenly felt a little nervous and shy. "You mean we—" "Yes, that's exactly what I mean." He looked meaningfully at the bed. "Go and lie down there. I'll come to you after I take a shower. The woman looked like a deer in the headlights, and her face was red. She got up and did as he requested. Her clothes were so sheer that she felt like she was floating when she walked. She looked shyly at Jonathan from the bedside, then she slowly untied her clothes and laid on the bed. As soon as she was lying down, Jonathan turned off the light. The woman giggled nervously. "Why did you switch the lights off?" "It's more romantic." Jonathan walked toward the bathroom and smirked. The woman stretched out of the bed and listened to the shower running. She smiled excitedly and rolled onto her side. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, Jonathan quickly phoned Nancy. "Hello, my darling. I need to ask you, is Eduardo still in the hacking business?" She wasn't sure why he wanted to know, but she replied, "Yeah, he's still into that. He's become quite proficient." "Good. I need his help with something that I'd like to share with the whole of Cuba." After saying goodnight to her, he hung up the phone and quickly showered. "What's taking you so long?" the woman called from the bedroom. "I'm almost done. Just a minute. Do you miss me already?" "I can't bear to wait any longer," the woman laughed. She propped herself up against the pillows when she heard his approaching footsteps. The next moment, she felt his hand curl around her chin and press her lips open. Expecting a warm kiss, she suddenly felt a pill slide into her mouth. She tried to spit it out, but Jonathan pressed his hand over her lips, and she was forced to swallow it. He released his hand, and she gasped in horror. "What was that? What did you drug me with?" Jonathan smiled at her in the dark. "The same thing you wanted to spike my drink with." She felt sick in her stomach, and she realized what had just happened. "I'm young. I don't need any enhancers," he said sarcastically. "Tell me, who sent you? Was it Theo or Alexander?" She gritted her teeth and didn't answer. "It must have been Theo. Am I right?" She hadn't expected him to guess correctly, and her body stiffened. "How dare you?" she whispered angrily. "You're so loyal to him. It's almost admirable. Don't worry. He'll be here soon." Jonathan chuckled. She tried to get up, but the drug's effect was too powerful. She had initially planned to spike his wine, but had been afraid he wouldn't drink it. So, at the last minute, she had slipped the pill into a small pocket and had planned to give it to him when she kissed him. However, when he had gestured for her to lie on the bed, she had removed her nightgown and had left the pill in her pocket. She had never expected him to find it. Her body began to feel strange, and she anxiously rubbed the sheets. Her teeth began to chatter, and she couldn't feel her lips. She groaned as she started to lose feeling in her body. Jonathan left the room and found Norman waiting for him in the dark courtyard outside the bungalow. They stayed in the shadows until they saw two people approaching. It was Theo and his wife, Julia. Julia seemed confused. "Are you sure you saw Jonathan take my sister to his bungalow?" Theo snorted. "He didn't take her. She willingly went to his bungalow. He's a handsome man. Doesn't surprise me. But we must hurry now, or we'll be too late." They reached the door and quietly listened to the sounds from the room. Shocked, Julia was about to push the door open when she suddenly felt a cool sensation on her neck, and she slumped to the ground. Theo started to cry out, but then he felt something strike the back of his neck, and he also lost consciousness. In the darkness, Jonathan and Norman dragged Theo into the courtyard and lay him on the blanket on the lawn. Jonathan removed a small dropper from his pocket and let a few drops of clear liquid slide into Theo's mouth. He then placed an empty bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the lawn. He returned to the bungalow where Norman was waiting for him. They covered the unconscious woman with a blanket and gently lifted her out of the bed. They carried her to the courtyard where Theo lay and placed her beside him. Jonathan took his phone out of his pocket, positioned it in a concealed area, and adjusted the angle. He removed the blanket covering the woman, and Norman switched on the outside lights. Then, Jonathan nodded at Norman, and they lifted Julia from the ground, where she had passed out earlier, moved her away from the bungalow, and gently leaned her against a nearby wall. Soon, the woman awoke and noticed Theo lying next to her. Without hesitation, she jumped on top of him. Theo woke up, but the drugs had already taken effect, and he lovingly embraced her. They rolled around passionately. Matthew was sitting in his oversized leather wean-back chair, watching the news. He was old school and still preferred to watch the news on television. The evening reports had just begun, and the news anchor was about to announce the latest headline when the image suddenly blurred. Matthew frowned. He thought it must be a problem with the transmission signal and was about to change channels when a new image appeared on the screen. It showed 2 figures in an intimate embrace. He was shocked at what he saw. "Whoever's in charge should be fired," he thought angrily. The figures began to moan passionately. Appalled, Matthew quickly switched off the television and went outside for a breath of fresh air. He wasn't the only one who had been watching the news that evening. Thousands of viewers witnessed the broadcast in disbelief.
"What are you doing here?"
the woman on the screen asked.
"What do you mean?"
Theo replied.
"What are you doing here? Thought you were chasing after other men." "No, you're the only one for me."
She smiled and kissed him lovingly. He suddenly sat up and looked around, visibly confused. He kept still for a moment and then shrugged before he leaned over and kissed her passionately.
"Did you come looking for me?"
She nodded.
"The other guy was so unromantic. He didn't even touch me."
She stroked his forehead.
"When will you divorce my sister?" "Soon, I promise. I need a bit more time." "After everything we've been through? Why do you need more time? Do you still love her?"
Theo snorted.
"Love her? Of course not. She makes me feel ill. I would have divorced her long ago if it wasn't for her family connections. My dear Linda, there was no one like you. You're the only woman for me."
Suddenly, an angry voice shouted from off-screen.
"Theo Davidson, what is going on here?"
The viewers were glued to their television screens, as though they had been watching an intense sports game. At first, It seemed like it was only the two lovers in the scene, but the appearance of a third person had changed the situation entirely. It was evident that the two lovers were in-laws, and the third person who had shouted at them was the angry wife. The wife had also instantly revealed their identities when she had caught them in the act. The viewers gasped when they learned that it was Theo Davidson, the second eldest son of the powerful Davidson family. Everyone knew that he had married Julia Walton, a wealthy heiress of the Walton Empire. The Waltons had made their fortune by trading in rare and exotic fabrics. Julia's eldest brother had recently died in an accident, leaving her as the sole heir to the family business and wealth. Other than her late brother, no one knew that she had any siblings. Julia rushed over and grabbed the other woman by her hair.
Linda, how dare you? Your mother tricked my father into having you. When my family wanted to disown you, I took pity on you and forced them to acknowledge you. Is this how you thank me for my kindness? By having an affair with my husband?
The viewers were shocked. However, it was also evident that Theo wasn't very sober. He pushed Julia aside and embraced Linda tightly.
Ignore her. I only want you. She means nothing to me.
Julia fell to the ground in shock. She struggled onto her feet and glared at her shameless husband and half-sister. Wailing hysterically, she stumbled away. The Cuban nation was rocked by the shocking scene taking place on national television. Soon, the news hit the internet, and social media platforms buzzed with hundreds of comments. Someone had even found old photographs of Julia and Linda and were mercilessly comparing the two women. Some people criticized Theo for being a scumbag and couldn't believe he could treat his wife like that. Others commented that although it had been an arranged marriage, it was clear that Julia had developed feelings for her husband over the years. Linda was called a harlot and a homewrecker. Matthew's phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Frederick. Did you see the evening news? It's a scandal. The family's name has been dragged through the mud. He returned to his living room and quickly turned the television on again. Taking a careful look, he soon recognized the setting as one of the courtyards outside his guest bungalows. The television station had finally given up on tracing the hacker who had taken over their live broadcast. The technicians disconnected the transmission and broadcast a message that said they were experiencing technical difficulties. Jonathan had retrieved his phone from its concealed spot and had returned to his bungalow. He replaced the bedding with fresh sheets and cleaned up all traces of the evening's events. He climbed into bed and pretended to be sound asleep. Matthew walked into the courtyard and glared at the mess. He angrily struck Theo in the back with his cane. Theo jumped up in shock, and seeing Matthew, he and Linda quickly hurried away. Matthew glanced toward Jonathan's bungalow. The door was shut, the curtains drawn, and the lights were off. He immediately guessed what had happened. Theo had been the one who had attacked Jonathan, but revenge had been taken, and he ended up being the laughingstock of the entire nation. Matthew shuddered at the thought of Jonathan's ruthlessness, and it was even worse than what Oliver had done. He also knew that Jonathan had done it on purpose. It was his way of saying he had no scruples, and Matthew felt rather proud of him. Theo returned to his room and took a long, cold bath. The drugs wore off, and he eventually regained his senses and was shocked when he realized what had happened. He was the butt end of countless jokes on social media. Stills from the footage that had been broadcast had been turned into memes, and the entire country was laughing at him. He was so furious that he smashed everything in sight, leaving the furniture in his bungalow in ruins. Julia had left the Davidson estate and had returned to her mother's house. Her brother had died recently, and she had been left as the sole heir of the Walton Empire. She no longer needed to rely on Theo. She was angry, bitter, and ready to divorce him. She picked up her phone and sent him a message. You disgust me. Go ahead and marry that slut half-sister of mine. I know all about your secret dealings behind your father's back. You would have been ruined long ago if it wasn't for my family's investment. I'm going to withdraw the money. You had better get yourself ready for jail. Theo read the incoming message and turned red with rage. He angrily threw his phone toward the door. Alexander happened to pass by as it landed on the floor. He bent down and picked it up. He stared at Theo's messy bungalow and smirked. "Didn't I tell you? Jonathan is scheming and cunning. He'll use whatever you throw at him as ammunition to get back at you." Theo was furious. "Get out!" he shouted. He wasn't prepared to listen to his brother. "Calm down," Alexander said without even flinching. "You and I are in the same boat now." Theo huffed and slumped onto the couch. Alexander continued. "Tomorrow is Arthur Williams' funeral. Everyone who is anybody will be there. We don't have concrete evidence to prove it, but it's no secret that Arthur was murdered." He paused momentarily. "So, what if, at the funeral, someone let it slip that Jonathan shot him? Do you think Oliver would sit back and not do anything about it?" Theo narrowed his eyes. "Of course not. He'll be forced to react." "Exactly," Alexander sneered. "He already knows what happened to his father, but when it becomes public knowledge, he'll have to act. This is Cuba. We have ways of dealing with such situations, and there's only one way to settle a grudge. They'll have a duel." "Yeah, but I don't think Oliver will be allowed to use real bullets," Theo said. "I guess not. However, the rules state that there must be a mediator in the event of a duel. It can either be someone from the Sloan family or the Davidson family." Alexander lowered his voice before continuing. "Think about it. Our father won't be pleased with you after what happened with your wife and her sister. He probably won't let you be the mediator, but I haven't upset him like you have." Theo's eyes lit up. "Yeah, I get what you're saying." The sun rose over the sprawling Davidson estate the following day. Its warm golden rays seemed to wash away the filth from the previous evening's incident that had taken place in the courtyard outside of Jonathan's bungalow. Everyone knew Theo had lost his Davidson family business and fortune inheritance rights. The scandal had left him destitute and disowned. However, much to everyone's surprise, he didn't seem to care. Instead, he went to see his father to tell him he wanted to marry Linda. He said she was his true love and didn't care for anything else. Matthew was so shocked and distraught that he almost had a stroke. The family doctor recommended bed rest so that the old man could recover. Therefore, he could no longer attend Arthur's funeral. Matthew lay in his bed and thought about Jonathan. It was dangerous in Cuba, and he worried he couldn't guarantee his successor's safety. Jonathan had a lot of enemies. He called for his faithful butler. "Jonathan needs to be protected. Please arrange for someone to follow him and report to me when there's trouble. You have my full authority to handle any situation that may endanger him. His safety is of utmost importance. Do you understand?" Walter nodded. "Yes, sir. Don't worry. I'll keep an eye on him." That morning, Jonathan and his cousins from the Davidson family went to the Williams estate for Arthur's funeral. The funeral was well attended, and important guests from across Cuba arrived to pay their last respects. Oliver's burn wounds had healed well, but he still wore a mask. His damaged skin had begun to recover, and the scar tissue had slowly receded. It was clear that he would eventually recover, and it would become impossible to tell that he had once been severely burned. He marveled at the medication produced by the Jung family. It had given him the chance to recover completely and not spend the rest of his life disfigured and scarred. He also regretted that the family didn't seem to have anyone to continue their medical legacy. It seemed like such a waste. Oliver thought about Jonathan. He knew he would attend Arthur's funeral that morning, but wasn't looking forward to seeing him. Dressed in a black suit, Oliver walked across the lavish lawns toward a large hall where the funeral service would be held. He stood at the doors and greeted each guest as they entered. A servant let him know that the Davidson family had arrived. Oliver watched as a group of men slowly approached the hall. They greeted him politely and expressed their sympathies for his family's loss. Jonathan was the last person from the Davidson delegation to greet Oliver. He wore an immaculate black suit, and his domineering aura filled the room as he entered the hall. The large hall was soon full of mourners, and it was time for the funeral service to begin. Melancholic music filled the air as Arthur's widow, Mary Ann, Oliver, and the rest of the Williams family walked down the aisle and sat in the front row. Mary Ann's eyes were red and swollen from crying. She turned to Oliver and, in between sobs, said, "What will happen to me now?" She and Oliver had never had any children of their own, and as his second wife, she had become greatly concerned about her future in the family. Oliver shrugged and glanced sadly at his father's casket. Jonathan looked up at an ornately framed portrait of Arthur. He glared at the image with coldness in his eyes. Arthur had been responsible for the deaths of Nancy's parents and his brothers. Arthur's death didn't change his hatred for the old man. The grudge between Jonathan and Oliver ran deep. Although he had found out much later from Esther that it had been Arthur and not Oliver who had killed his brothers and Nancy's parents, he still held a grudge against him. After all, Oliver had targeted Steve and had wanted him to die in Mexico during the explosion. Fortunately for Jonathan, Steve had survived, and Oliver's plan had failed. Their grudge had started many generations ago, and Jonathan knew he would never make peace with Oliver. Oliver gave a moving eulogy and highlighted many of Arthur's remarkable achievements. He lit a candle on the table next to the casket and returned to his seat. The mourners gradually made their way to the casket and bid Arthur their last respects, as they each lit a candle and bowed heads. Because the Davidson family ranked as the leading family in Cuba, they were the first to light their candles for Arthur. Walter stood in for Matthew in his absence. He glanced at the casket. "On behalf of the head of our family, we wish you farewell. Mr. Davidson asked me to tell you he'll miss playing chess with you." One by one, the Davidson brothers lit a candle and said a few words of respect. Jonathan was the last to approach the casket. He didn't light a candle, and he didn't say a word. Instead, he looked at his reflection in the mirror on the wall behind the casket and smiled coldly. Many people who were present knew about the situation between Jonathan and the Williams family. They observed him, curious about how he would conduct himself. He was just about to turn around when he heard someone gasp loudly. Many of the other mourners also looked in the direction of the gasp. Jonathan gazed into the crowd and saw a thin man scratch his head. Realizing everyone was looking at him, the man hesitantly said, "I've just heard something disturbing, and I'm not sure what to make of it." "What is it?" someone asked. The man looked at Jonathan and swallowed nervously. "I heard that the man standing over there, the Davis boy from America, shot Arthur, and he died because he couldn't be treated in time." There was an audible gasp from the many mourners in the hall, and they all stared at Jonathan and Oliver. The thin man continued. "Arthur's housekeeper was hit in the crossfire and also passed away." Everyone in the room fell silent. Jonathan knew there was trouble brewing. Someone had wanted to use the funeral to create a spectacle and goad Oliver into making a rash decision. It didn't take long for someone else to speak up. "Oliver, is this true?" Oliver hadn't yet officially taken over the position as head of the Williams family. They had planned to announce the news at a celebration that would be held a few days after Arthur's funeral. "Did Jonathan Davis kill your father?" someone asked Oliver. Alexander smiled. He was curious to hear Oliver's response. Oliver stared straight at Jonathan, but his mask hid his facial expression. "Yes, it was him." Everyone in the hall gasped and stared at Jonathan. They excitedly started discussing the situation. "Why is he here today? Has he come to make a mockery of a family in mourning?" "Jonathan, aren't you worried that Oliver will seek revenge? You're not as powerful in Cuba as you are in America." "Maybe the Williamses don't want to cause any more trouble with him or the Davidsons. But he killed Arthur. Oliver isn't afraid of death. He needs to stand up for his family. He is their next leader, after all. The people in the room began to voice their opinions about how Oliver should handle the situation, each trying to outsmart the other until someone said, "Has everyone forgotten the unwritten rules set by the forefathers of the Cuban nation?" A hushed silence fell over the room as the person continued. "It's customary in our country to settle such matters with a duel." Everyone in the room began to talk at once. "Yes, that's the best way to handle it. Besides, I heard that Jonathan killed Arthur because the Williams family killed his brothers." "It's true. These two families can only settle their problems with a duel." The people grew more excited as they enthusiastically spoke about the idea of a duel until Oliver had had enough. "This is my father's funeral. Show some respect. I want to bid my father farewell before I decide on what course of action to follow." The room became quiet once again, and everyone bowed their heads in respect. The mourners continued to light candles and say their farewells to Arthur. Everyone looked grief-stricken, except for Jonathan. He glanced at the mourners and thought, "Are they really as sorrowful as they seem? Surely, only Mary Ann and Oliver feel genuine grief." The funeral service ended, and the mourners slowly left the hall and milled about in the lush gardens. Ordinarily, most of them would have gone home after a funeral service, but the revelations in the hall and the possible duel kept them hanging about. Oliver glanced over at the crowd and sneered. Even though someone had raised the idea of a duel, it hadn't slipped his mind, and he had planned on making Jonathan pay for what he had done. He stood on the steps outside the hall and called out to the crowd. "The grudge between me and Jonathan is common knowledge. Therefore, I invite him to a duel, and all of you will bear as witnesses." The crowd began to chatter excitedly among themselves. Walter moved closer to Jonathan and spoke in a low voice, so no one else could hear him. "Matthew guessed that something like this would happen. We have made arrangements in advance. There won't be bullets in the gun." Jonathan nodded, but doubted that would be the case. He thought about Theo and how he had gone to his father to insist he wanted to marry his sister-in-law. It had nothing to do with true love. Theo had wanted to upset his father enough to make him ill and prevent him from attending Arthur's funeral. He could ensure the guns were loaded and Oliver would kill Jonathan. Jonathan knew it would be impossible to tell whether Oliver's gun was loaded, and he knew that he would kill Oliver if he had bullets in his own gun. Oliver walked up to Jonathan. "I was hoping we could end the grudge between our families. Although you were born in America, the Davidson family is in your bloodline. Therefore, you are one of them. Here in Cuba, we have a tradition that dates back centuries. When family conflicts become too complicated, two key figures are chosen to fight in a duel. So now, I officially challenge you to a duel. Do you accept my challenge?" Jonathan stared calmly into Oliver's eyes and nodded. "Yeah, I accept your challenge." "Good. I invite everyone present to follow us to the shooting range. We shall witness the duel between myself, heir to the Williams family, and Jonathan Davis of the Davidson family." He gestured to the crowd and pointed toward the shooting range at the bottom of the estate. He then called for the butler to arrange for 2 guns. The news of the duel left Mary Ann so distraught that she almost fainted. "Please, Oliver, don't do this. What will become of us if something happens to you?" "This has nothing to do with you," he replied coldly. He glanced at the butler. "Take her back to her room." Mary Ann cried uncontrollably as the butler ushered her away. The crowd walked across the large estate and eventually arrived at the shooting range. A fence separated them from a field where Oliver and Jonathan would duel. Dressed in black suits, both men looked somber. Jonathan's chiseled appearance seemed harsher than usual, and Oliver's cold eyes glared out from behind his mask. They stood about 50 feet apart and faced each other. It wasn't difficult to shoot someone at such a close range, especially if the person shooting knew how to handle a gun. A few women in the crowd turned away or hid behind their husbands, unable to watch. Mackenzie Sloan stood among the crowd and stared at Jonathan. He had ignored her at the dinner hosted by the Davidson family recently, and she hoped he would die. But the deal she had made with Alexander and how he treated her made her realize that Jonathan was far better than him, both in ability and looks. Women were naturally drawn to men who displayed strong traits, and Mackenzie was no exception. She felt slightly torn between the two of them. For years, she had persisted in playing a role in Oliver's life, and she wasn't ready to let go of her feelings for him. However, as she watched the two men stand opposite each other, prepared to duel to death, she didn't know which outcome she hoped for. She clenched her fists and tried to resist the urge to run onto the field and stop them. The crowd hushed when the butler arrived with 2 gun cases lined with red velvet. The men walked up to the butler and each picked up a gun. Then, they walked back across the field to their designated positions and waited for the butler's signal to start. Everyone kept quiet and held their breaths, waiting for the guns to fire. Theo stood in the crowd and sneered. Alexander stood beside him and smiled dryly. While Theo thought that only Oliver's gun had been loaded with bullets, Alexander knew both had been prepared with live rounds in the magazines. They would most likely both be killed in the duel. They were both excellent marksmen, and it was impossible to miss one another at such close range. He thought about what would happen if both of them died. The Davidson family would be under his control after Theo's fall from grace, and without Oliver, the Williams family wouldn't have any heirs, and its fortune would end up being divided between the upper class of Cuba. The Sloan family would get a piece of the pie, but Mackenzie would still be putty in his hands. He thought Gavin might even give her a share of the takings, but it didn't matter to him. Although he was concerned about Gavin, the situation would play out in his favor. Theo was simply a pawn, disposable and insignificant. The butler raised his hand. The two men stared at one another. The butler dropped his hand, signaling for the duel to begin. 2 loud gunshots rang through the air simultaneously, shattering the silence. Everyone watched with horror as both men fell over and slumped onto the ground. Alexander's pulse raced with excitement. He grinned and felt an immense feeling of joy. Luckily, nobody noticed him. Instead, they gawked at Jonathan and Oliver. Mackenzie opened her eyes, and her heart sank. Are they both dead? Can't be, she thought in despair. She held her breath, unable to tell who she was more concerned about. Then, to everyone's surprise, Jonathan and Oliver staggered onto their feet and looked at each other with wide eyes. Before the duel had begun, Jonathan had looked at his gun. It had been loaded with a single bullet. He had realized that someone had played a dirty trick on him. Someone had tried to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Oliver had noticed this and had been just as shocked. He had been told that Jonathan's gun wouldn't be loaded, and yet, when he had seen the expression on Jonathan's face, he knew he had been misled. Suddenly, the gravity of the situation had hit him. The Davidson family would no longer be a problem if he killed Jonathan. He wasn't sure how Jonathan's friends would react, but he knew that Maria and Steve would seek revenge. Esther would end up stuck in the middle, and she may treat him as an enemy for the rest of her life. While the Davidson family wouldn't do much, the Davis family and Jonathan's friends would certainly avenge his death. In reality, killing him would disadvantage Oliver in the long run. He knew that Jonathan's close friends were fiercely loyal. He wouldn't benefit at all. The bullet in his gun was a tool that someone else had placed in his hand to satisfy their agenda. The 2 of them had cocked their guns, aimed, and had waited for the butler's signal. In that brief moment, Oliver had seen Jonathan remove the magazine and put it back, signaling to Oliver that his gun was loaded. In that one action, Oliver had immediately understood. He had known that Jonathan didn't want to kill him either. If he died, the Davidson family would only have become stronger. Jonathan had everything he wanted in the U.S. He had no ambition to take over Cuba, and didn't want more bloodshed. He had chosen to give up. Oliver had nodded, and no one else had seen him. No one except for Jonathan. He, too, had seen that Oliver didn't want to kill him. They didn't need to have a long conversation about how they truly felt about one another. They were practically strangers, having only known each other briefly. But in that short moment on the field, they had said more with their subtle actions than ever. So, when the butler had given his signal, they had both fired their guns. Jonathan's bullet had brushed past Oliver's hair, and Oliver's bullet had skimmed past Jonathan's ear. They had both fallen to the ground and lay still, waiting for everyone's reactions. Jonathan wasn't surprised at the look of sheer joy in Alexander's eyes. He also saw the smile creep across Gavin's face. He saw Theo's look of astonishment and Mackenzie's shock. He immediately knew Alexander had planned the whole thing, using Theo and Gavin as his pawns. The crowd gasped as the two men slowly walked across the field and handed their guns to the butler. Oliver was the first to extend his hand. It would seem that we both need to work on improving our shooting skills. Let's forget about the past. Jonathan stretched out his hand and shook Oliver's. Yeah, it sure does. Maybe one day we will fight again, but not today. Alexander clenched his fists inside his pockets. He was so angry that he wished he could burn the two of them with his furious glare. Theo realized his brother had used him. Not only had he been used, but he had also lost everything in the process. He turned to Alexander. I see you've once again failed to achieve anything. You really don't have any talent whatsoever. He gave his brother a dirty look, turned around, and walked away. Alexander found himself alone. The shocked crowd didn't know what to do. It was evident that Jonathan and Oliver had purposely missed each other. They had dueled, as tradition had dictated, and neither had won or lost. Oliver had saved his family and his family's reputation by reaching an agreement with Jonathan. The onlookers weren't sure what had happened, but they had seen how the two men had almost killed each other, and that was good enough. The Williams family invited everyone for a late lunch. When everyone had eaten, they slowly started to leave. Jonathan had already greeted his hosts and was about to leave when he heard someone calling him. He turned around and saw Mackenzie. She looked at him and felt flushed. Her pulse began to race. She found him deeply attractive. Although she was still obsessed with Oliver, Jonathan stirred other desires in her. She smiled and blushed. I was wondering if you have some free time to visit us. Jonathan raised his eyebrows. Is this an invite from you, Mackenzie, or the Sloan family? It's from me. I think we got off on the wrong foot. You resolved the grudge between the Davidsons and the Williams family. I want to thank you and celebrate it with you as a friend. Jonathan accepted Mackenzie's invitation, and she was surprised that he agreed so easily. She wondered whether he had been so cold toward her the last time because his wife had been there. I look forward to welcoming you into my home as a guest, she said. She returned to the Davidsons soon after and spoke to Matthew. Matthew had already sorted out the rough sequence of events in his mind based on what Gavin had told him. It's time to give Alexander a taste of his own medicine, he thought. He's been way too reckless lately, and I've been indulging him too much. Jonathan, you said you wanted me to promise you one thing. What is it? I want control of the Sumoco Corporation in Boston. Matthew smiled. Boy, you don't beat around the bush, do you? We're family, aren't we? We have to be honest with one another. What do you think? Can you make it happen? His uncle nodded. It's a deal. I'll also give you control of the company's Houston operations. Jonathan was stunned. He didn't think his uncle would agree so quickly and wondered why he was willing to relinquish his power. Are you surprised? Matthew asked, seeing his expression. We made a deal. You went to the funeral, and now I have to fulfill my end of the deal. Besides, I'm giving the other companies to you. I thought perhaps you were joking. Matthew took a sip of his coffee. Nope. I've seen enough of Alexander's ruthless tactics. He's trying to destroy you several times, and I'm sure he'd come after me given the chance." Jonathan was thoughtful. All his suspicions about his evil cousin had been confirmed. Alexander would stop at nothing to seize power. "I'll help you as much as I can," Matthew continued. "If anything happens to me, you can step in and fight Alexander tooth and nail. He'll have met his match. I trust you'll protect the family's interests." Jonathan thought his uncle was a wise old man. "What about the company's operations in Florida? Are they also in Alexander's control?" Matthew nodded. "Yes, but I'm giving those to you too." He stayed true to his word, and his actions were swift and decisive. As the main shareholder of the Sumoku Corporation, he had the authority to do whatever he wanted. With half of the share of the global car market, the company was the Davidson family's most lucrative enterprise. The next morning, Matthew called a meeting of all the shareholders to introduce Jonathan formally. Once they were seated, he passed around a document. "I invited you here today to make an important announcement. The piece of paper in front of you is a letter of appointment. I would like to nominate Jonathan Davis as the new president of Sumoku Corporation. He'll be in charge of all of our operations in the United States and, eventually, around the globe, with the exception of Cuba." A stunned silence followed. Theo stood up. "This isn't fair." Matthew raised his eyebrows. "Fair? What's fair, Theo?" "All the senior executives, including my brothers, have put a lot of time, money, and effort into building this company. I'm sure all the people present here today would agree. Jonathan, on the other hand, has never worked for Sumoku. He doesn't deserve to be given such power. How can we even trust him?" "I'm surprised to hear you say that, Theo. You talk about fairness and hard work, without even considering the dedicated men and women working 10 hours a day on the production line for a measly salary. They work overtime, while you spend a few hours a day in the office and wine and dine in expensive restaurants. Tell me, is that fair?" His nephew glared at him. "The executive's job is to run the company, not toil away in a factory. We provide a different kind of value." "You make a good point," Matthew said, looking around the room. "It's all about value. I made this decision because I believe that Jonathan can bring immeasurable value to our enterprise." He didn't give the others a chance to speak, and quickly signed the letter of appointment as the main shareholder. He then looked at Jonathan. "My lawyer's here. He's going to transfer 20% of my company shares over to you." Hearing this, Alexander, who had been silent the whole time, pounded his fist on the table. He only held 8% of the shares, which meant Jonathan was about to become the corporate's biggest shareholder. He couldn't believe his dad was taking away his chance to become the head of the company one day. Jonathan looked at him and smiled with glee. "Don't worry, Alex. I'll do an excellent job. The company will be even bigger and better with me at the helm." Alexander couldn't take it anymore. He got up, kicked his chair angrily, and left the boardroom. The lawyer soon arrived, and Jonathan and Matthew completed the handover. "I'm counting on you," Matthew said, patting his nephew on the back. "The corporation's future and the family's prosperity are in your hands." "Thanks. I won't let you down." As he left the office, Mackenzie called him. "Jonathan, I know this is short notice, but I was wondering if you'd like to come to a small soiree I'm hosting at the waterfront pavilion this evening." "Sure, I'd love to." He invited Norman to go with him. Mackenzie was pleased to see Jonathan at the gathering that evening, and she raised her glass to him at dinner. "To my dear friend Jonathan Davis, may you enjoy health and prosperity always." Jonathan simply nodded, but he didn't drink his wine. He cornered her after the meal. "What's the real reason you invited me here?" She sighed, exasperated. "Do I need one? Maybe I just enjoy your company." "Well, I came here for a reason. I want to know if you're willing to cooperate with me." Mackenzie was taken aback. What kind of cooperation do you mean? I need help ruining someone's life, Jonathan replied, looking at her meaningfully. I'm talking about Alexander. She turned pale and almost dropped her wine glass. I don't understand. I saw that video of what he did to you, how he treated you and made you wait on him. Don't tell me you're not looking for payback. Her jaw dropped. What? How? Her positive impression of Jonathan instantly vanished. Is that why he's been so nice to me? So he can blackmail me? She wondered. She felt utterly humiliated and wished the ground would open up and swallow her. He shrugged. It's not important how I got a hold of it. The point is that I saw it. Now, are you willing to work with me? He wasn't going to tell her that Eduardo had hacked into the Davidsons' encrypted server and discovered the video, which Alexander had stupidly uploaded. Mackenzie trembled and looked down at the ground. Okay, I'll cooperate with you. Jonathan nodded. Good. I need you to do something for me the next time he contacts you. There will be a next time, I assume. Frankly, I'm not interested in why you did it, but I promise to destroy all traces of the video once I get my hand on Alexander. She swallowed, whispering, Okay. She met his gaze. What's your plan? He smiled at her, even though she disgusted him. He was in a good mood that day. Me? I just want to rule the world and make my wife the happiest woman on the planet. It's as simple as that. She had never heard anything so romantic and felt a sudden pang of envy toward Maria. Your wife's a lucky woman. She is, and she's also the most important person in my life. I need to go now. Thanks for a lovely evening. I'll be in touch soon. He left her standing there. She went over his words repeatedly in her mind and wished she had someone like Jonathan in her life. Tears welled up in her eyes. What's it like to be completely doted on by a man? She wondered. Will I ever find someone like him? She took out her phone and called Oliver. Jonathan thought it strange to be cooperating with Mackenzie, but felt he had no choice. He had to deal with Alexander before the latter destroyed him and everything he had worked for. He decided he would weaken his conniving cousin's position as much as possible and make it clear that he was not to be messed with. He was tired of constantly being on the defense and thought it was high time to attack. He decided to get rid of Theo, too, who was nothing but trouble. I need to come up with a plan that I can implement when I return to the States, he thought. He called Nancy as soon as he returned to the Davidsons that evening, and he told her everything. She was packing for her trip to Santa Fe to see Jacob and Hannah. She had also invited Esther along, and the two of them boarded a plane the following day. They were excited about their trip. Both Jonathan and Xavier were away on business, and it gave the two women a chance to catch up and have a relaxing weekend away. They had endless topics to discuss and couldn't wait to see Santa Fe. They headed to Hannah's place as soon as they arrived. They loved the neighborhood she lived in and found the building's residents exceptionally friendly. After setting down their luggage and having afternoon tea, they took a walk around town with Hannah. Jacob was off doing interviews somewhere and told them he would meet them later. Having spent 2 months in Santa Fe, Hannah was very familiar with the city. She had made some friends, but spent most of her time alone, so she was pleased that Nancy and Esther were visiting her. She took them to the farmer's market, where they both bought fresh fruits and vegetables. She knew many of the sellers there and laughed and chatted with them happily. They returned to the apartment afterward to make peach cobbler and apple pie. Jacob arrived later that evening and recorded a video of them baking as part of his research project. This is great, he exclaimed. I'm going to use this for my documentary on Santa Fe. Friends gathered to make pastries from the fresh fruit they bought at the farmer's market. People are going to love it. Though Nancy wasn't particularly talented at baking, she enjoyed watching Hannah, who had become an expert in just a few short months. Esther was vexed. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't seem to knead the dough properly. Nancy playfully threw some flour at her. Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it soon. If not, Xavier can do the baking. Esther laughed. He better learn before we get married. Maybe you should put off the wedding until he becomes a master baker, Hannah joked. Esther stuck out her tongue. I'm not waiting. He better learn to cook quickly, because I'm a sucker for good food. They all burst out laughing. Just then, the doorbell rang. Ashley and Brock, who had made a last-minute decision to travel to Santa Fe, had arrived. Hannah looked up as Ashley and Brock came into the kitchen and nodded in greeting. She wasn't particularly happy to see them again, but reminded herself that Brock had saved her from drowning in the river. Oh, you're making pastries. How divine, Ashley exclaimed. Can we help? She grabbed her brother's arm. Hannah's an expert, you know. Brock looked down at the floor and shifted his feet. Ashley smiled at the others. We'll go and pack our things and freshen up. We'll be back in a jiffy. She pulled Brock out of the kitchen and dragged him to their room. Nancy looked at Hannah with concern, but was relieved to see the calm, relaxed expression on her friend's face. The siblings returned a few minutes later. It was obvious that Brock felt awkward, but Ashley didn't seem to notice. Can you teach us how to make pies? She asked the group. Hannah can. Nancy and I are still new at this, Esther replied. Ashley turned to Hannah. You're the boss. Show us what to do. Hannah picked up a piece of dough and demonstrated. You need to flatten it, sprinkle it with a little bit of oil, and then fold it carefully, like this. Do this repeatedly, then mold it into the required shape. The pair watched her and nodded. Nancy tried to contain her laughter. She didn't believe Brock had any interest in baking, and she watched him clumsily hold the rolling pin. She signaled to the others to give him and Hannah some privacy, and they tiptoed out of the kitchen. Nancy snuck up on Jacob, who was in the living room watching the videos he had just recorded on his phone, and startled him. Hey, you scared me. He started chasing her around the room in a game of tag. Nancy laughed. Her brother was much taller than she was and quickly caught up to her. He grabbed her and threw something down the back of her shirt. What was that? She cried. A ladybug, he replied, grinning. It was on the balcony. You jerk. No, I'm afraid of insects. Remove it this instant. Jacob just smiled and made no move to help her. She ran to the bathroom and took off her shirt, cursing. A hard object fell onto the floor. She stared at it in astonishment. It was a beautiful emerald green pennant. She picked it up and returned to the living room. Jacob, what's this? Do you like it? I saw it at a shop I passed earlier today and thought it would be perfect for you. He took out a silver chain from his pocket and handed it to her. She pretended to be angry. And here you had me convinced I had a bug in my shirt. Don't be mad. It's just a joke. Come on, sis. Nancy burst out laughing. How can I be mad? I'm just glad you didn't tell me you put a scorpion down my shirt. He smiled and helped her with the necklace. Esther felt a pang of jealousy. I wish I had a younger brother. You can have him, Nancy joked. Esther ran over to Jacob and hugged him. You've gotten so tall. Do you have a girlfriend at university? He turned red with embarrassment. No. I know that look, his sister observed. Don't lie. You're dating someone. Who's the lucky girl? He looked at the floor awkwardly. No one. We're just study pals. She pouted. Okay. Don't tell me then. But you're hurting my feelings. Esther smiled. Nancy, if you ever have a son, you'll drive him crazy. He'll be afraid of dating anyone. If my future son ends up dating your future daughter, I'll be over the moon, Nancy said, and then sighed longingly. Too bad that's not possible. Esther looked at her, surprised. What's not possible? What do you mean? Nancy shook her head. Never mind. We can discuss it another time. You know you can tell me anything. We're practically sisters. Nancy waved her hand to dismiss the topic and turned to her brother. Come on, Jacob. Show us the videos you recorded. In the kitchen, Brock and Hannah had finished preparing the pies. Do these go in the oven now? He asked. Yes, but be careful. It's hot. Ashley stood in the doorway and secretly took photos of them. She then sent the pictures to her brother. It was a warm and balmy evening, so the group of friends decided to have dinner on the balcony. Hannah had invited a professional chef who had prepared a delicious chicken casserole for the occasion. They ate heartily and drank wine, enjoying each other's company. After the meal, they retired to the living room. Jacob suggested they watch a reality show featuring various upcoming talents in the music industry. On the screen, a host was introducing the next act, and Hannah was shocked to see people in the audience waving banners with Riverside City written on them. She recalled Ezra telling her that they would be performing on a talent show and wondered if this was the one. Right on cue, he called her. Hannah, turn on your TV. We're about to perform on We've Got Talent. She could hear the sound of instruments and cheers in the background. I have it on already, and I'm tuning in. I can't believe it, Ezra. This is so exciting. Keep your fingers crossed for us. If all goes well, we're going to be big stars. I will. You guys have worked so hard for this. You're destined to make it big. Thanks. Okay, I gotta go now. We're up next. Talk to you soon. She held her breath in anticipation as the program's host announced the name of their band. The audience clapped and cheered, and Hannah heard several fans shouting Ezra's name. The band arrived on stage. Hannah's heart was pounding. She could almost feel their energy and excitement. She knew that taking part in a nationwide talent show on TV was a big deal. The crowd burst into applause as they started to play. Shivers ran down Hannah's spine. The prelude ended, and Ezra began to sing in his beautiful, haunting voice. Ashley watched Brock from the corner of her eye and could tell something was bothering him. He sat frozen on the couch, pastry in hand, staring at Hannah. What the heck is wrong with him? She wondered. That's Ezra, Jacob exclaimed. He's unbelievably talented. I watched some of his YouTube videos. I bet he and his band will go into the next round. Ashley watched the lead singer on stage and found him very attractive. Despite his youth, he had a deep, mature voice that captivated the audience. He had prominent facial features and a nice body. He then glanced at Hannah, whose eyes were glued to the screen, and suddenly realized that her brother must be jealous of the singer. She was right. Brock was seething with anger. He knew Ezra was the man Hannah had been talking to on the phone that day in the park. What does she see in that guy? He wondered. She's like a love-struck teenager. Doesn't she know that musicians can't be trusted? They're all a bunch of womanizers. He was appalled by her behavior. It was as if she had forgotten that he was the one who had rescued her when she had fallen into the river not so long ago. He coughed loudly, and she turned to look at him. Hannah, could you bring me some more of that apple pie? He asked. She glared at him. Can you wait until the song is over? He sucked in his breath. Everyone else in the room was watching the show and oblivious to their exchange. That lead singer was so cool, Nancy exclaimed after the band had finished performing. Esther nodded in agreement. He's quite sexy, isn't he? Nancy laughed. Careful. Don't forget that you're engaged. Her friend shrugged. So what? My other half isn't here. Ezra reminds me of Norman, Nancy said. He's very manly, and there's something mysterious about him. He's also quite mature for his age. I just recorded you saying that, sis, Jacob teased. What will Jonathan say when he hears you go gaga over some singer? Nancy jumped up and snatched his phone away. Don't you dare, you moron! Esther smiled. Jonathan's not that bad either. Don't forget my brother, Ashley added, glancing at Hannah. He's also quite the ladies' man. Brock, you seem rather quiet, Esther observed. Is everything okay? He's just jealous of Ezra, Ashley blurted out before she could stop herself. Everyone in the room fell silent, embarrassed for Brock and Hannah. Just then, Brock's phone rang. He got up and went to the kitchen to take the call. Hello?
Son, it's me. When are you coming home?
The day after tomorrow.
Good. There's a young woman I'd like you to meet next week. She's the Pullman's daughter.
Brock was furious. Don't do me any favors, Dad. You ruined my life when you kicked me out of the company. Why don't you go out with her yourself?
Don't use that tone of voice with me. I'm only trying to help. I know you've been miserable since your divorce. Besides, I already promised the Pullmans I'd introduce you to their daughter.
So what? I don't owe them anything, and I certainly don't need you to interfere in my love life after what you did.
Brock, listen to me. This woman's perfect for you. She's beautiful, talented, and kind. All I'm asking is that you take her out and get to know her.
What are you going to do? Point a gun to my head if I refuse? His father sighed.
I know you're still upset about your divorce, but you need to get out there and meet new people. Forget about Hannah. That's in the past.
How dare you mention her name?
I see I hit a nerve. You're in Santa Fe visiting her for the second time, aren't you?
How do you know? Are you having me followed? Brock demanded.
I don't need to. I'm warning you, though, that if you don't take this Pullman girl out, there may be consequences for your ex-wife.
Brock was stunned. What do you mean?
I heard the company she freelances for is facing some financial difficulties. It's nothing that can't be overcome, but who knows what the Pullmans will do. They run a publishing powerhouse, you know, and can easily ruin a company if they want to.
Brock couldn't believe his ears. He was trembling with anger. What are you trying to say, Dad? That you'll destroy Hannah's career if I don't go out with the Pullman's daughter?
I'm just saying that you should go out with her and see if you get along. Is that too much to ask?
Brock stared out the window and wished he had just ignored his father's phone call. He took a deep breath to calm himself. Look, I have nothing to do with Hannah anymore, so don't use her to blackmail me. We're divorced. I realize now that I made a mistake. It was a shotgun wedding, and it's over now. The child is gone, and we've both moved on.
Is that so? Then why do you get so excited when I mention her name?
Brock was about to reply when he suddenly saw Hannah standing a few feet away. He panicked, wondering whether she had overheard him talking to his father. He stood frozen to the spot and stared at her in silence. She averted his eyes, grabbed a fruit basket off the counter, and hurried away. He wanted to call after her to explain, but words failed him. Maybe Dad's right, he thought. Am I fooling myself, believing there's still something between us? Why can't I just forget her? He heard his father say,
Brock, are you still there? What's it going to be? I already promised the Pullmans that you'll take her daughter out.
My mind is made up. I won't go.
You will go, and you're going to like this young woman. If you marry her, I'll let you come back to the company and take full control. Everything will work out fine. Just wait and see.
Brock hung up and pounded his fist on the kitchen counter. He had no idea what to do and was afraid that his father would punish Hannah if he didn't obey his orders. He wondered whether he should seek Jonathan's help in the matter, but decided against it. While everyone was still in the living room watching the talent show on TV, Nancy and Hannah snuck into the bedroom to talk privately. Jonathan had sent a gift for Hannah with Nancy. Look at this mess, Hannah exclaimed, seeing the clothes strewn on the floor. It must have been Cleo. She does this sometimes. My clothes were all washed and neatly folded on the bed. Now they're all covered in dirt, and I don't have anything clean to wear. I'm going to have to teach her a lesson. Nancy smiled. Don't worry. I packed plenty of clothes. You can wear something of mine. She went over to her suitcase and pulled out an elegant silk pantsuit. What do you think of this? It's new. It's gorgeous. I wonder if it'll fit me. Why don't you try it on? Hannah put on the clothes that Nancy had offered her, and then she picked up the clothes that Cleo had scattered on the floor and made her way to the laundry room in the basement. In the living room, Ashley, Jacob, and Esther were laughing at one of the singers on television. Look at his belly. He looks like he's 8 months pregnant, Ashley said. Esther suddenly smelled something strange. Do you smell that? It smells like gasoline. Ashley sniffed the air. No, I don't smell a thing. Neither do I, Jacob added. Esther frowned. I'm pretty sure I'm not going mad. Let me take a look. She stood up and got closer to Hannah's room. The smell got stronger. Hannah, Maria, get out of there quick, she screamed a few seconds later. Nancy could hear from Esther's tone of voice that something was wrong, so she made her way downstairs. The others also started to worry and ran to Esther. Before Nancy reached them, there was a loud explosion. The violent explosion rocked the 3-story building. A brilliant flash of light temporarily blinded everyone as an intense heat wave washed over them. The shockwave that followed immediately after knocked them onto the ground, and they stared in disbelief as they saw the building burst into a sea of flames. The shock was indescribable, to the point where everyone thought they were dreaming. But the after effects of the explosion couldn't have been more real, and everyone felt terrified. Jacob was the first to come to his senses. He sprang to his feet and immediately began to call out for his sister. His body trembled and he started to cry. He was about to run through the flames when he heard Nancy's voice. Jacob, don't come here. He ignored her and jumped over the burning debris to reach her. He saw her and hugged her tightly as he sobbed. Are you okay? Did you get hurt? Her hair was slightly singed, but luckily she hadn't been burned. I'm fine. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She had been in Hannah's room at the time of the explosion. She didn't know what had happened, but her ears buzzed from the loud noise, and it was only then that she realized there had been an explosion. The color drained from her face when she looked at the burning building. Hannah was in the basement. Brock heard Nancy shout out Hannah's name, and he was suddenly overwhelmed by a terrible feeling of dread. He began to shake as fragmented memories flooded his mind. He saw her standing in an elevator, and then she was on the side of the road in tears. They were in a hotel room, and then in a doctor's room, looking at a sonar of their baby on the monitor. Then they laughed happily as they held a marriage certificate in their hands. His head ached as one image after another flashed through his mind. They were in their apartment, giggling and cuddling on the couch. He saw her shivering outside in the cold, and he suddenly remembered she had lost the baby. Then they were at Jonathan and Nancy's wedding. He felt a deep sense of regret and sadness well up inside him. A sharp pain shot across his head, and beads of sweat dripped down his forehead. He clasped his head in his hands and sobbed. He remembered everything. His memories of Hannah had been vague since his accident, but now he remembered everything about her clearly. He looked up and saw that everyone was rushing down to the basement. A chill ran down his spine as he struggled to his feet. She had been downstairs in the basement. He found himself unable to think or speak. The commotion had drawn the neighbors out of their houses, and they hurried over with hoses and buckets to extinguish the flames. Hannah was nowhere to be found. Ashley called out for her until her voice was hoarse. Brock felt as if he were sitting alone in a movie theater, watching a tragedy unfold before his eyes. He felt an agonizing pain in his bones. A short while ago, he had said their marriage had been an accident and that he had never loved her. If only he hadn't said those words, or if he had stopped her from going into the basement. Perhaps then, the awful event would never have happened. He stood and stared at the burning building like a bystander. He had no strength left in him. He felt broken. Soon, the blazing flames had been doused, and people started searching through the smoldering debris to rescue those who had been trapped in the fire. More than 20 people scoured the building, but no one found Hannah. Is it possible that she wasn't in the building at the time of the explosion? Someone asked. Nancy shook her head. She was in the basement doing her laundry, and I was in her room. Would have heard her come back upstairs, and no one saw her. Her heart sank as she thought about Hannah. She didn't understand why they couldn't find her. It was as if she had vanished without a trace. The night was long, and nobody got much sleep. They combed through the debris with little success. Some people scoured the nearby bushes and neighboring buildings, but there was no news. Brock looked like a ruined building and felt lost. Hannah had simply disappeared. He had finally remembered everything about her, and she was gone. By the third day, the search for Hannah had been called off. Jacob racked his brain to remember what he had seen the day of the explosion. He recalled seeing something streak across the sky a few moments before the explosion. He concluded that Hannah must have been kidnapped first, and the explosion had been used as a distraction. Nancy agreed with his theory, but wondered who would want to kidnap her. Hannah kept to herself and had no enemies that Nancy knew of. She had never needed bodyguards and didn't seem to be in any trouble. Nancy couldn't understand why anyone would go through so much effort to kidnap Hannah. She wasn't a high-profile person and didn't have extensive business interests. The situation baffled her. All she and everyone could do was report a missing persons case and wait for the authorities to investigate. Brock had left Santa Fe on the second day after the explosion. Ashley was furious, and she struggled to understand him for the first time in her life. He didn't say anything about Hannah's disappearance. He only said he had urgent matters to attend to in the city. 2 days after Brock had left, Obsidian Industries announced on their website and social media pages that he and the Pullman family's eldest daughter, Lindsay, had become engaged and would be married the following month. As heir to the Porter family business, Brock would resume his previous position as president of the Obsidian Industries branch in the United States. Ashley read the news on her phone and didn't know how to feel about it. She knew Brock better than anyone else did. She had seen how he had spiraled out of control after Hannah had left him, how he had been willing to compromise his pride to win a contract he wouldn't usually have cared for. Her heart ached when she thought about him. She had hoped he would find his way in life, although she had never expected him to choose the easy way out. She felt betrayed by him and decided to phone him. It was nighttime in Brazil. Brock was there for work. He heard his phone ring and looked at the name on the screen. It was his sister calling. He answered and greeted her abruptly. She got straight to the point.
I read the news about your engagement. Is it true?
She sounded upset. Yes, it's true.
But why? Was it your choice? I don't understand. We don't know what happened to Hannah, and then you left the day after she disappeared. You said it had something to do with the company.
She paused momentarily while Brock remained silent.
We didn't stop looking for her. We searched for days. We haven't given up hope, but you've done nothing. Even if you don't remember, she was once your wife. You didn't even help put out the fire. How could you leave like that? How could you find a new woman to marry? What's wrong with you?
Brock sighed heavily and kept quiet. When he eventually spoke, his tone was indifferent. I'm tired. I don't want to scrounge and beg for work anymore. I don't like who I've become. I don't want to be a drunk all the time anymore. I have boozy lunch meetings. I get drunk at home. I want to be happy. I'm the next in line to lead the Porter family to greatness. I've been foolish, and I have seen the error in my ways. He laughed softly before continuing. Besides, Hannah and I are divorced. She's not your sister-in-law anymore. I should be the closest person to you, not her. His words stunned her.
I must have misjudged you,
she exclaimed angrily as she hung up on him and threw her phone down. She collapsed onto the floor and burst out in hot, angry tears. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her stomach. It was so intense that she found herself struggling to breathe. She had never experienced such incredible pain before. She began to sweat feverishly and felt dizzy. The color drained from her face, and she suddenly felt too weak to stand. She reached for her phone and hurriedly dialed emergency services. She crawled to the door and pulled herself up to unlock it before collapsing again. Only then did she notice thick warm blood seeping through her skirt. The operator on the other end of the line took her address. "Please, hurry," she said weakly, and then fainted. She didn't know how long she had been unconscious. She became aware of the sound of ambulance sirens wailing in the distance, and then she felt herself being placed on a stretcher and carried away. She tried to keep her eyes open, but her eyelids were heavy, and she slipped in and out of consciousness. She awoke to the sound of voices. "She's been bleeding heavily. It could be a miscarriage. Prepare a blood transfusion. Stat. Contact the hospital and arrange for a trauma surgeon and operating theater. Tell them we'll be there in less than 10 minutes. Ashley tried to grab a hold of something, but she couldn't move her fingers. She tried to speak, but she couldn't make a sound. Then she blacked out. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself lying in a hospital bed. She was in a large ward. It was noisy with nurses moving about, tending to the other patients. A nurse noticed she had woken up and quickly called the doctor. A few minutes later, the doctor arrived and instructed the nurse to wheel her into a private examination room. She looked around and saw that she had a drip inserted into her arm and an infusion bag hung from a hook above her bed. "What's wrong with me?" Her mouth was dry and her voice hoarse. The doctor felt her pulse and scribbled a few notes in a file. "You had an ectopic pregnancy and had to undergo emergency surgery. You almost died." Ashley felt her world crash and break into a million pieces. The thawm had made her pregnant. She felt a sense of panic wash over her. "What happened to the baby?" The doctor shook his head. "I'm sorry, but unfortunately, it didn't make it. While some women may carry an ectopic pregnancy to term, others experience severe bleeding, and the fetus doesn't survive." Ashley felt a deep sadness in her heart. "So, the baby is gone?" "I'm very sorry, Miss Porter." The doctor patted her gently on the arm. "We had to terminate the pregnancy to save your life. You wouldn't have survived the bleeding." She sighed. "I must have been to the gates of hell." He gave her a sympathetic smile. "I can see that you didn't know you were pregnant. You'll make a full recovery. But first, let's sort out your file and hospitalization. How old are you? Is there any family we can call? Do you have medical insurance?" Ashley felt numb as she went through her details with the doctor. She thought about Brock and wondered if he was spending time with his new fiancée in Brazil. She remembered that Jonathan hadn't returned yet from Cuba. She sighed, relieved that she wouldn't have to tell them about the pregnancy. The doctor noticed the sadness in her eyes and frowned. "Would you like us to call your boyfriend?" A sharp pain pierced her heart. The thawm's attitude toward her the morning after they had been together had already explained everything there was to know. She had foolishly believed that he had genuine feelings for her. She had thought he liked her, and she felt they had fallen in love when he kissed her, and they had become intimate. But she was mistaken. He had been drunk that night, and he had told her before not to fall for him. She hadn't listened. She realized that he had used her. That was why he pretended nothing had happened when he had seen her the next day. She looked at the doctor and shook her head. "I don't need his help. I have my own money. I'll settle the hospital account by myself. I want to be transferred to a private ward, please." The doctor nodded. "That's fine." He was in his 50s, and his daughter was about as old as Ashley. He felt sorry for her. That night, as Ashley lay alone in her hospital bed and contemplated her life, her phone began to ring. She looked at the screen. It was Latham. "Ashley, are you okay?" Latham asked over the phone. "I heard you weren't at the office today." He had been away on a business trip and had only returned late in the afternoon. He didn't know that she hadn't been at work. "I'm okay. I have a bad cold and stayed at home." "I hope it's nothing serious." He sounded slightly worried. "Shall I come over? Can I bring you anything?" "No, I'm fine. I've taken some medication and I just need to rest. I don't think I'll go to work tomorrow either." "Are you sure?" Latham seemed concerned. She didn't know what else to say, so she made a random excuse. "It's nothing serious. I'm just tired. It could be because I've been dieting." He laughed. "Ashley, I was only joking when I said you were heavy. You're not fat. What kind of diet have you been on?" She sighed. It was typical of Latham. When it seemed like he cared, he changed the topic into something frivolous. She didn't know how to deal with him. "That's none of your business. I'm going to go to bed now. Good night, Latham." She felt annoyed, and she struggled to fall asleep. The incision in her abdomen hurt, and she felt weak. Suddenly remembering that she hadn't logged into her game for a few days, she opened the app and joined a live game. However, none of her usual teammates were online, so she played as a lone wolf. Her opponents were too strong, and she was slaughtered. She eventually quit and logged out. She lay on her back and stared up at the ceiling. She stretched her arms, and her hand landed on her stomach. As she rubbed it gently, she thought, "There used to be a child here, but I suppose it wasn't meant to be. Like my relationship with Latham. I fell in love with him, but it wasn't meant to be either." She felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness and sadness, as dark as the night outside the window. She wanted to drown in the blackness. Ashley didn't know when she finally fell asleep, and she woke up the next day feeling better. She hated being in the hospital, especially because she was alone. The nurse arrived to administer the next dose of pain medication and gave her a sympathetic smile. That afternoon, Ashley requested to be discharged. The doctor didn't recommend it, but she insisted. She took the prescription he had written out for her and slowly walked toward the hospital pharmacy opposite the outpatient waiting area. As she approached the pharmacy, she saw a familiar figure. It was Latham, and he was with a young woman. They had been sitting in the waiting area and were about to go upstairs to the doctor consultation rooms. The young woman seemed quite plain and had a small mole close to one of her eyes. She was much shorter than Latham, although she wore high heels. Ashley felt a lump in her throat. She quickly turned around and hid behind a pillar. The hospital was busy. Latham and the young woman walked past the pillar slow enough for her to overhear their conversation. The young woman was talking, and she sounded nervous. "I hope our baby is healthy. Please wait for me while I see the doctor. I can't believe I'm going to be a mother." Then Ashley heard Latham's voice. "Don't worry. I'm sure everything is fine. I'll wait here for you." Ashley's ears burned, and she glared at Latham, who had his back toward her. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. It seemed like a bad dream. The young woman was pregnant with his child, and he was accompanying her for a checkup. The fury of his betrayal cut through her aching heart like a sharp blade. Her wound began to hurt, and she felt a burning pain that caused her eyes to tear. It was because of him that she had almost lost her life. Yet there he was, with a clear conscience, supporting the mother of his unborn child. He had pretended to be a broken man, tainted by the loss of his true love. She had watched him cry and, like a fool, allowed his tears to flow into her heart. Only now did she realize that everything about him was a lie. He was a player with a girlfriend on every corner. She scoffed. He had also been brought into this world as the child of a woman not married to his father. Ashley suddenly felt appalled at the irony of the situation. While she had almost died carrying his child, alone and without any support, he had casually made another woman pregnant and seemed happy to give her all the care she needed. Her anger began to overflow, and she heaved as her head spun. For a moment, her vision blurred, and she almost fainted. She grabbed the pillar and steadied herself. She was Jonathan's sister, and she had to compose herself. Eventually, the pain subsided enough for her to collect the medicine from the pharmacy. She pressed her arm tightly against her aching wound and sat in the waiting room. She wanted to phone Latham. She needed an explanation. Latham had stopped in the hallway outside the doctor's consultation rooms. He watched the young woman close the door behind her before rubbing his forehead. He sighed. He wasn't in love with her, and he didn't want to marry her. Fate had played a nasty trick on him. It had been a one-night stand. He hadn't heard from her for weeks, until one day she had messaged him with the news. At first, he thought it was a message from Ashley. He thought about the situation and had decided that the unborn child was innocent, and he couldn't allow the pregnancy to be terminated. His father's health had started deteriorating, and he had always hoped to see the birth of his first grandchild. Latham leaned against the wall. He was exhausted. He wondered if this was his future. He had to marry a woman he had no feelings for, raise their child, and try to live a peaceful life together as a family. He hoped he would forget about Olivia one day, and maybe even fall in love with his new, soon-to-be wife. There seemed to be a part of him that was empty and filled with regret. Suddenly, his phone rang. He looked down and saw it was Ashley calling, so he answered. "Ashley? Come downstairs. You'll find me in the outpatient waiting area." She didn't explain why she knew where he was or what she was doing at the hospital. Latham was stunned. "You saw me?" "Yes." Her voice was cold and emotionless. "Is this a bad time?" "No, it's fine. I'll see you in a minute." He didn't know what was wrong with her, but the tone in her voice gave him an uneasy feeling.